Welcome to Determined to Succeed. I'm your host, Dawn Mullarney, also known as the Unique Connector. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today because I have a fellow introvert here on the podcast. And so I kind of want to talk about how to stand up and to make it feel natural, but to also be okay with being an introvert and not feel depleted when you're kind of spotlighting on yourself. So let's kind of talk about that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Alexson Calahan and I run Small Adventures Communications. We offer public relations services to science-based organizations, but I'm also a lifelong introvert. So being in public relations and putting other people out there has been really comfortable for the past 20 years of my career. But now as a business owner, the things have flipped a little bit and I've got to be out there and I've got to present what I do because people they don't just show up. It's not build it and they'll come, right? Like you have to say, here I am and here's what I do. And getting comfortable in that as an introvert has been a real journey.
Yeah. And I would say, I love that you took the leap and you're still navigating things and always learning all the time. And that's where I thought it would be a really fun conversation to chat about this, just because too, from what you used to do in the past of really spotlighting these amazing doctors, scientists, whatnot, that, to try and then, to spotlight on you and to notice too your amazingness. And that's where I feel like sometimes it's hard to switch gears. And so I guess even let's talk about a little bit of your path and kind of what you did to become to where you are now.
Yeah. So I spent about 20 years working for global health nonprofits and doing public relations, both at the local level and then at national and international levels. And so a lot of what I did was presenting new research to the media and bringing forward doctors and just really some of the best doctors in the world, best researchers in the world, bringing them to the media. And it was very easy to establish their credibility because they have a million letters after their name. They've done a ton of research. They're very established in the space. The research is groundbreaking. And that's an easy story to tell. And then, 2 years ago, I opened my own business and I realized now, I do that for my clients still, but I also have to do it for me. And it's been really amazing to kind of distill my own story and my own expertise into, bite-sized nuggets and then put it out there in a way that's comfortable, so that I'm not feeling, overexposed or like any kind of imposter. Because I have, like I said, almost 20 years of experience doing this. So my experience is real. And talking about it and bringing it out has helped me grow as a business owner. And, it's just bolstered my confidence. And I don't feel like such a hermity little introvert anymore, which is kind of nice.
Well, I love that. And that's where I feel like the topic too of being vulnerable and being authentic and where do you draw the line? And, I guess even for you, what are your thoughts behind that? Because yes, there's these doctors with all the letters behind them and it's easier to spotlight them and, and to talk about all their greatness, but we all have greatness too. And doesn't mean that we have to have all these letters behind us. And so where do you draw the line too of sometimes showing up and being vulnerable, telling about your story, maybe telling about your past to help people relate or to understand why you maybe are one that can help them with their problem? Like, where do you draw the line of going too far of being vulnerable in your eyes?
Yeah, I think that's it's an individual answer to that question. For me, I mean, as an introvert, right? Like I'm a pretty private person, but at the end of the day, like I do want to show people who I am as a human being. So I bring forward all of the excitement that I have for what I do. I think as a service-based business owner, and I'm sure like a lot of folks are kind of in this boat, we started our business not to be like slick entrepreneurs, but we started our business because we love the thing we are very good at. And, we're good enough at it to make a living. So I think really focusing on the pieces of my story and the pieces of myself that allow me to be good at what I do. My powers of sitting back and observing and reading a room and understanding a landscape and understanding an audience and what barriers and obstacles they may have to kind of helping an organization move their mission forward. Those are strengths that I want, that I bring out and that I like to talk about. So it's different for everybody, I would assume, in terms of how you're telling your story, but it's up to you as a business owner when you're kind of thinking through how can you put yourself out there. It's really about finding those elements of your story that make you really strong and make you the expert in what you do.
And I guess, too, we were talking earlier about, putting yourself out there and trying things. And I think that's always kind of a thing where so many people think, well, I have to have it perfect. And how am I going to adjust things, or take a few baby steps and then maybe switch gears and go this way. So what would you kind of have for suggestions for someone that's kind of in that spot, that's trying to navigate that world?
Yeah, it is definitely tricky, especially when it's yourself you're putting out there. I feel like sometimes with our business things, we feel a little bit better about, I'll try this in an email and see what it works. And it doesn't feel as personal. But when it's yourself you're putting out there, that is tricky. But I would say have no fear. If you start with like that solid base of knowing who you are and knowing your story and the problem that you solve for people, and you bring that forward, and you might adjust some things, like you might adjust some wording, you might adjust where you're presenting it or who you're presenting it to. But I think you can feel good about who you are, because that's what you've got, right? Like you shouldn't feel too self-conscious about it, because we're all experimenting. Like there is nobody walking around here who's got it all figured out. So we can all feel good about trying different things, because that's just a part of it, right? Like we've all done it.
Yeah. And I think that's the one thing with all of this, how our society is, but also the social media and everything, it seems that everybody's got it all perfectly, figured out. They know all the things and they don't ever have any hiccups. And so, even for you, what are some just different kind of tactical steps coming from your sphere of things, of what you could, tell our listeners of how to keep going, but also how to put their PR hat on for themselves?
Yeah, it's definitely tricky, but I think in this day and age, excuse me, like you said, we do all do it to some certain extent, or we watch other people do it on social media, right? Like putting yourself out there, presenting a version of yourself or your business that, is out there to inspire connections, right? And to build that community. We're all doing it at some level. It's when you really get intentional about it and, work to be strategic on it, that you can see some great things come of it. So I always tell clients to kind of start with their story, right? Like start with some information about the problem that your clients have. So what are you solving for them? And then tell a story of when you worked with a client that you were able to help them through something, right? Similar to what your prospect's going through right now. And then provide a bit of action so that client can take action and can, work with you in some way. So having like a basic story is really key. And then the next thing that you want to do is work through and define your audience. Make sure that you know who are the people most likely to be your clients, and talk directly to them. Like there's a lot of other people out there, but just focus on your people. And once you find them, and you start making connections and they understand who you are and what you bring, that's when I think the magic really starts to happen. It's really like amazing. And I think, as women business owners, like I'm sure you've seen this, right? Where you just start connecting and one connection leads to another and to another. And you just, all of a sudden you discover it's like this secret network of friends and cheerleaders who are out there, just supporting each other. And I love that.
Yeah. And I would say, I think that's what I've really realized, through this, entrepreneurial journey of just so many things I've learned through it, but also too, just those others that can relate to you, or two that are here championing behind you that maybe you don't always realize, that are going through similar things, or two that they are navigating this in a different way, and two, giving themselves the new perspective. And I think that's even for me, through this process, is I just had to keep reminding myself, like, you can't help everybody.
Yeah.
And I think there's ways of how you can help people in different ways, but that doesn't mean you have to have a certain product or service that you're selling that's going to support everybody. There's ways in which you can be creative to help people in different ways. And so as I say that, what's coming up for you, even with your business?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. So there's you know, as I've built my network and have gotten out there a little bit more, right? Like I'm doing all sorts of things with other business owners, and sometimes it's just as simple as like having those conversations and talking to somebody who's going through the same things, right? And just making those connections with somebody, because when you're no longer in an organization, you don't have those coworkers to kind of, you know, bounce ideas off of or vent to when you need to, but you've got to make that community on your own. And I think that's been so amazing just to have found, because before I started my own business, and I've dreamt of it for like, you know, years, right? Like running my own business was always the goal, but I was so afraid of the hustle and the competition and just, you know, having to be the slickest and the best. And I've been so thrilled to see that that is not the case. I can be myself. I can connect with other, even like, you know, nonprofit PR consultants, and we can be friends because we do things in different ways, and there's plenty of clients for everybody. So just like, yeah, just building those relationships without an agenda behind it is so lovely, I think.
Well, you had a great reminder there too of having that abundance mindset that you can learn from each other, but also too, you can have it be your inner circle that's rooting you on and, you know, even bounce ideas off where it is kind of like your inner coworkers in a way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even too for you, you know, focusing on nonprofits, you know, that kind of pulls at heartstrings. So sometimes, you know, how do you draw the line with pulling at the heartstrings, but also to making sure it's a business, you know, decision that's best for you and your business, I guess, even.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I mean, when you work with organizations that are really focused on, you know, missions to solve, yeah, like an intense problem that our world is facing, it can be so difficult, like on so many levels, right? Like you're telling hard stories of people who have been impacted by these things. You, yeah, like you want to help everybody, but you also, you know, need to have the funds coming in. So it's really about, for me, you know, I've intentionally built my business in a way that gives me enough space to process and to be a human. There's clients that I haven't been able to take on because it's just not the right fit. And it's again going back to like the community I've built. It's nice to point them in other directions, right? So that they're not left hanging. They still get somebody who can do what they want. But it's really about pouring myself and my professional brain into causes where I know I can make a difference. Like my specific expertise can help this organization move their mission forward, because that's what they all want. I believe so much in the power of nonprofits to improve, you know, the world. I think that everybody who spends their living working with nonprofits and, you know, doing this hard work, like there's some of the most optimistic people, and I love that energy that these folks bring, and that I had to bring for so long. You couldn't do that hard work if you didn't think that you were actually making a difference.
Mm.
So it's nice, but you do have to set some parameters, you know, just in terms of like, there are definitely types of clients that, while I really would want their mission to move forward, I couldn't take them on, just because, you know, it would be hard to tell those stories every day. And I know that about myself, and I know that there are lots of other consultants who would be, you know, stronger and able to tell those stories just fine. So there's somebody out there for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I love that, you know, sometimes we have to take a moment to kind of look from a different lens and to make sure, is this going to fuel me or is this going to drain me? Is this
Right.
going to be, you know, and that's where even too, like anyone can learn from this, you know, any kind of client that we take on. Sometimes we only take it on because of the money, and sometimes it drains us, you know, it gives us burnout, and we don't want to do that. And so, you know, I love learning about different ways of coming up with better boundaries
Mhm.
or ways in which, you know, I really need to be okay with this decision and keep moving ahead and not, you know, sit and ponder or wonder, oh, you know, maybe I could have done it. And
Yeah.
so, you know, are there things that you even done to help make better boundaries for yourself, or that others that could learn from you, like the listeners even?
I maybe, there's definitely things I've tried. Yeah. So before I started my own business, I worked full time, and I started my business 2 years ago, like kind of in the heat of COVID. And it was very difficult to be working full time, homeschooling my two young kids, and like, it was not going to work for me. So I needed to take a step back, right? Like I couldn't be on conference calls all day. And so when I started my own business, I really did think about it as, I wasn't like just a side hustle, right? Like I'm not just freelancing at night. This is a business. I run it, and I'm going to run it smart, so thinking about it's just me here. And but if I had, 20 employees, what would I want? Right? What would I do for them? How would I take care of them to make sure they didn't get burnout? Because I kind of needed that filter, right? So, I set up my business. I try to avoid working on Fridays. I still homeschool my kids, even though, the pandemic has chilled a bit, but it's, so I do balance my time, right? Like afternoons are for work, mornings are generally like spent, doing lessons and field trips and stuff. So finding my slots and what works for me, and, having like vendors and, independent contractors that I bring in who I trust is really, really helpful. But making sure that I always thought about it as a business that was kind to humans was really important to me. So that probably means different things to different people. But for me, it meant having an abundance of time and a real tight calendar on conference calls, because as an introvert, I can't sit on Zoom all day. It makes me tired. And then my brain's
Yeah.
able to do its best work. So, keeping that confined to like a day or two of calls, or a day or two of in-person meeting, and then a day or two where I'm just able to do the work is quite nice.
Well, and I love that too. And it kind of, what you were just saying too, of how you were thinking of, okay, if I did have employees, this is what I would do. If you were thinking outside the box. And I think that's even to go back to even what we said earlier about being an introvert and sometimes putting the spotlight on ourselves, or to like, being a business owner, and now I have to showcase me. And so I love that you're thinking of it kind of in a different way. And I think that's where a lot of people should be sometimes thinking of like, okay, so if I was doing this for Sally over here, I would probably do X, Y, and Z. Where sometimes we almost have to do that when we're doing it for ourselves, if that makes sense, where it's like, think of this as your friend. What would you do for your friend? How would you help this business out? What would you do for your coworker?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's so important, and it really does help quite a bit when you can like remove yourself a little bit, because it's so loaded, right? We all are walking around with all sorts of ideas about ourselves that are probably untrue. And so being able to remove that and look at yourself objectively, like look at your resume or your client roster or whatever you need to do to, to really say like, that person who's doing that is amazing. It happens to be me, but like,
Mm-hmm.
being able to really objectively look at it is so, so important and really empowering too.
Mm. Well, and I love that, you still focus on nonprofits, even from going, from what you were doing before corporate to doing this on your own. And so I think one other like thing that probably some listeners or even myself too is, when you think of nonprofits, you always think, oh, well, that's going to be hard work. There's not really much money, or, maybe if you only work with the big ones, or, how's that going to work, and that's where I guess even for you, what advice would you have for those that are really passionate about a nonprofit, but they're worried about taking that entrepreneurial leap and making sure that they can have funds even for themselves? Like, what would you say to someone right now thinking about that?
Yeah, that's definitely the hardest part, I think, of taking that jump, right? Is the financial question. And when your clients, or your prospective clients really either need grant funding to pay you, or, like are scraping it, asking the board, that can be really tricky. I think it's important though to, um, to kind of understand as a consultant where their funding is coming from. If it's coming from corporate sponsors, like that gives a whole different flavor to the partnership. If it's coming from grants, like how can you support them, even if you're not a grant writer, like, but understanding the process, understanding the options that they could go to, and what they need to, like, as they're writing those grants to get funding for you. Like, what do you need to do to support them? And I think is so important, because that just allows you to be a more whole partner for them. You're not just thinking about like that, you guys get the money and like call me when you have it, but to really support them a little bit through the process, or make friends with a consultant who's a grant writer, so that you can kind of, bounce clients off of each other is a good thing. It's tricky, but if you want it and you know the value that you can provide, it can still happen. And you also don't always have to be a pure mix, right? Like, or I'm sorry, a pure nonprofit. You can pull in a mix, if you want. Like I said, there's more than enough business out there, I think, for everybody, which is really encouraging.
Yeah. Reminder to us all to just have that abundance mindset. I think that's the one thing where so many of us like stop in our tracks, or we don't keep going because we don't think like, oh, there probably isn't more out there. And so that's where, even to one more other kind of question that I have for you is too, just how are you sticking to knowing your worth, and to charge still too? Because I think that's another thing of pulling at heartstrings, and then it's like, but no, I know the value that I'm bringing, and I can't, like, I got to feed my family, And so how do you also make sure you charge for what you're worth even?
Yeah, that is so tricky. And I think it's all about, being able to tier out your services so that you've got, like your big all-inclusive option. If that's something that, the nonprofit wants to pursue, that's amazing. And you'll be there for them. And if their budget is a little bit tighter, having options where, they still can tap into some of your expertise, and get the benefit of working with you, that's also good. It's just, and I'm not an expert at all in pricing. So, I think, again, that's kind of an individual thing, but knowing what your corporate consultants who do what you do charge, and bringing that to the nonprofits, because that's that's a whole other can of worms, right? Is like, nonprofits are trying to, and should be, elevating wages to stay competitive at a time like this. And that, isn't just true for staff, it's true for consultants as well. So when we all push for it, like, we all do better. Nobody wins a race to the bottom. So we should, knowing what we're worth and charging accordingly is always a good thing.
Well, I feel like you had so many words of advice and thoughts, and I love this conversation. And this is why I love the power of a network. And I'm like trying to pick my brain of like, where did we meet and how did we meet? Some of those moments I like blank on, but there's reasons I feel that we all meet certain people, because I know I've been rooting you on and seeing your things, and proud that too, you're just helping that nonprofit world and doing what you're leaning into, what you're good at. And so I appreciate you being on the show, and keep shining bright and making a change in that nonprofit world, but also be sure to keep spotting that light on yourself too through the process. But I hope the listeners found some good advice from you. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day, everyone.